My name is Randall Eggert. This class is Grammar and Stylistics. It's about writing clearly.
Grammar, grammar, grammar. So we're obviously going to talk about grammar in this lecture, and oftentimes people's reaction to hearing that word grammar is a rather negative one. For me, and I imagine for any of the linguistics majors in the audience, I have a warm, fuzzy feeling about grammar. I rather like grammar, but I think part of the reason that people have that negative reaction is because they perceive of grammar in a very narrow way. And in fact, there are at least 3 different ways that the word grammar gets used, hence the title of this video. So I'm going to go over those 3 types of grammar and talk about why 2 of them are very interesting and 1 of them not so much. All right, so the 3 types of grammar that we're going to be talking about are mental grammar, descriptive grammar, and prescriptive grammar. Mental grammar, well, obviously that's what goes on in our head. It's what allows us to speak language in the first place. It's that subconscious knowledge that we have that allows us to use, say, English. And I trust that all of you have a mental grammar for English. Otherwise, you wouldn't understand what I'm saying right at this moment. Descriptive grammar, this is what linguists do. It's a description of a language system. It's an attempt to model a mental grammar. It has as its purpose primarily just a way for us as scientists to try to understand what's going on in that black box of the human mind. And then there's prescriptive grammar, the one that I would argue gives a bad name to the other 2. Prescriptive grammar are those rules for how you should properly use a language. That's where the grammar police, the grammar Nazis, the grammar lady, all of those kind of stereotypes come in. I want to talk first about mental grammar, and there's a distinction that we usually make here. There are native speakers and non-native speakers. Now, both types of speakers will have a mental grammar for every language that they speak. So if you grew up speaking English, you are a native speaker of English. It means that you acquired the language naturally, generally from birth, versus being a non-native speaker, generally learning it in school, for example, meaning that you are taught the language instead of simply acquiring it. So a baby never sits down and consciously thinks about what is right or wrong in their first language. Whereas when you are learning another language, you usually do it very consciously, right? It's something you would probably do in school. And I trust that probably most of the people viewing this video have taken language classes in a second language. The other thing that's important to us about this is that a native speaker has robust intuitions about grammaticality, meaning that we know what sounds right and what doesn't sound right in our native language. Now, we also are likely to have intuitions in our second language. Like, so for example, I speak French as a second language, and I often have intuitions about what sounds right in French. The problem is that my children and my wife, who are native speakers of French, will tell me that my intuitions are wrong. So that's part of the problem, is that a second language speaker, their intuitions may not be accurate. Descriptive grammar. This is like the blueprints for a language. And it's kind of trying to reverse engineer it. So that would be like if you found the Star Trek Enterprise and tried to reverse engineer it and come up with the blueprints for it. That's what descriptive grammar is. We're looking at native languages and trying to model what we think is going on up there in a native speaker's head. But it's also used to teach a language to foreign learners. It's hard to teach a language without knowing how the language works in the first place. And then finally, for the purposes of this course, I find that it's very useful for understanding how to write clearly, to understand how the language works. Then we get to prescriptive grammar, the UG part. This is where, as I said, that stereotype of a grammar Nazi comes in. It's normative, meaning that the people are trying to get others to conform to some norm. They're saying there's one right way to speak English, say, and any other way is wrong. So there's a norm that we're all supposed to arrive at. It's imposed from on high, right? It's the people with power, either monetary or educational or whatever it is, political power, who get to decide what is right and what is wrong. And it's often contra-change. So we find that a lot of prescriptive grammar is trying to freeze language and not let it move, not let it change. Now, change, as linguists, we know change is inevitable. It's constant. Languages are constantly in flux. But prescriptivists are trying to stop it, right? It's going to creep forward. May not be fast, but it will always creep forward, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. Occasionally, prescriptive rules just simply get invented whole cloth, where somebody who had enough power to make their will, to impose their will on others, just decided that they liked language one way and not another, and so they created a rule. And that brings us to something that Joseph Williams refers to as an elegant option. So within the realm of prescriptive rules, there is still kind of a continuum. Not all of these prescriptive rules are created equal. Some of them are higher, more elegant, and we call these elegant options. They are prescriptive rules. I think that's important to keep in mind. We're not talking about descriptive grammar here, whose purpose is just to describe the way that people actually speak or write. If you follow these rules, it will mark you as a more careful, more formal writer. Many readers will not notice if you violate these rules, these more elegant ones. And in fact, they may notice if you follow them. And I've had this experience where friends of mine have been editing something I wrote, and very well-educated people, very good writers, who were actually not aware of some of these elegant options that I was following and marked it as being a typo. So that's what I'm getting at, is that some people may not even be aware of these rules, and they will think that you made an error. And then there is what Williams refers to as folklore. I think fake rules might even be a better way to think of it. They're not really rules. So the folklore that he's getting at, these are prescriptive rules that are not followed even by the best, most persnickety, most careful writers. The difficulty, of course, is in distinguishing an elegant option from folklore. And what I would say is be a good reader. Observe what other writers do. And especially think about the writers who you admire. Which rules do writers who you admire ignore? And if they ignore them, well, I think that gives you license to ignore them too.